So, thank you all for joining today's webinar called Insights from OWASP Future-Proofing SBOMs with CycloneDX. A little bit of a quick high-level overview of of ReversingLabs, of what ReversingLabs does. We have a searchable threat repository of over 40 billion files. This is 8 times larger than our nearest competitor. We are trusted by over 60 cybersecurity companies that are using this threat repository within their products. And one of the ways in which we've built such a great corpus of information is by analyzing over 20 million files daily. This is faster than any other threat binary analysis mechanism. And in that, we're identifying 3 million pieces of malware a day. We have 300 employees globally. We're a 5-star rated partner program. Gartner has recognized us as an SSCS solution. And most recently, I'm really proud to have been a contributor to the Verizon DBIR. Next slide, please. Really excited today to be joined by Steve Springett. He's the leader of OWASP Dependency Track. He's the chair of OWASP CycloneDX. He's the chair of the ECMA Technical Committee 54. He's the leader and co-author of OWASP SCVS. He's the leader of Package URL Standard, OWASP Global Board of Directors, and the director of Product Security at ServiceNow. Today, though, we'll be focusing on OWASP CycloneDX and all the insights that he has for us regarding this this offering. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Please go ahead and take us into CycloneDX and specifically 1.6 and what it has to offer the community.
Dan, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. ReversingLabs, thank you so much for the invite and hosting this webinar. My contact information, should you want to reach out to me, is at the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. CycloneDX, first and foremost, is a full stack bill of materials standard. It was primarily designed for cybersecurity use cases. It is community driven. What community exactly is that, though? Well, it's primarily the OWASP community, which is from their website. The OWASP Foundation, their mission is to be the global open community that powers secure software through education tools and collaboration. Primarily, the way that the OWASP Foundation does this is through over 260 chapters around the world, many hundreds of projects, CycloneDX being one of their flagship projects, and through various events, conferences, and other kinds of meetups like that. So that's the OWASP Foundation. It is a nonprofit 501c3 in the United States. If you are a developer or an application security person and you're interested in what OWASP has to offer, check out owasp.org, find a local chapter, contribute to a project, attend one of their events. It's a really great community. The standardization of CycloneDX goes through ECMA International, which is an international standards organization, specifically through Technical Committee 54, which I do happen to chair. Back up a little bit. CycloneDX, as I mentioned in the intro, is a bill of materials standard, not a software bill of materials standard. When we designed CycloneDX, we designed for everything in mind. And yes, software is a big part of that, but so are services, so is hardware, so is devices and medical devices and all of these other types of connected things. So when we designed CycloneDX, we designed for a lot of different things in mind. In fact, CycloneDX supports services and hardware and AI and ML, and more recently, cryptography. It supports vulnerabilities and how something came to be or the concept of formulation. It also can represent standards, any given standard, all of the requirements of that standard, and an organization's ability to attest to given standards. So as we see here, it's much more than a simple SBOM format. In fact, the bill of materials aspects of CycloneDX really encompasses just the services, software, hardware, AI, ML, and cryptography. As we want to inventory more things, we can theoretically add those things in the future. But the rest of these are really have nothing to do with bill of materials. In fact, CycloneDX is, while it started out as a bill of materials standard, it's rapidly evolving into a transparency expression language. Um, in fact, there's some things that we're going to be working on in 1.7 that we're going to save toward the end that might be very beneficial to a lot of organizations. One of the things around software is that it really hasn't lived in a bubble for the past 20 years, right? Software interacts with its environment, and representing services is kind of important when it comes to the inventory of things, as well as the attack surface of that collective thing. So we have this concept of being able to represent services. And if you had a CycloneDX document that only had services, well, we refer to that as a SaaSBOM. SaaSBOMs essentially complement infrastructure as code by providing logical representations of complex systems, complete with the inventory of all the services, their reliance on other services, all the endpoint URLs and data classifications, as well as a directional flow of data between the services and the components. This particular example kind of illustrates a traditional SBOM. This is my example application. A traditional SBOM, but one library's reliance on a service. So in this example application, we've got, looks like a stock ticker type of thing. We've got Acme Stock Library version 1.6. And it looks like we send some kind of a secret as well as some public information, probably some kind of credential, as well as maybe the stock ticker, right? Out to the Acme stock service, which then fetches personally identifiable financial information or PIFI. If with that, now my SBOM with my service information can now describe the reliance on that particular service, who the provider is, what the URLs are, what the data classifications and directional flow of data, any kind of trust boundary, traversals, even the licensing information about that service. For example, is it a subscription? If so, that's great. What happens to that subscription when it expires? Well, that's interesting. That could potentially lead to a denial of service condition on this application, right? So representing services as part of your inventory is, I believe, essential for success. True story. My employer, several years ago, we were contacted by one of our customers, and our customer was like, "Hey, your mobile app is fetching this random service up on the internet. What is it?" And we're like, "Huh, that's interesting. I don't know." It turned out that a transitive dependency was actually making a call. Now, it was a benign call. There was nothing malicious about it, but a transitive dependency was making a call out to the public internet. And if we would have had the intelligence, the SBOM with the services information in there, we would have theoretically known about that before the customer informing us. Obviously, that has been fixed, but it kind of goes to show that this kind of thing does in fact happen. So it's really important to be able to describe not just the software in your application, but the services as well. But if you had a SaaSBOM, a true SaaSBOM, right? You could describe, in this particular example, I've got 5 different microservices, an API gateway, etc. You could describe a very simple environment such as this, or something much, much, much more complex. And each one of these microservices in this example has its own SBOM, right? Which can also be referenced. by the SaaSBOM. So lots more to do than, or lots more capabilities than just a simple software bill of material. Software bill of materials is a great place to get started, but with CycloneDX, you have many, many more options and capabilities that you can mature into. Obviously, if software is eating the world, AI is obviously eating software. Um, the CycloneDX specification does support AI ML today, and it's built right in. And the beauty of the CycloneDX specification is really its flexibility. It's prescriptive. It kind of guides you in terms of how something should be done, which is great because it's really difficult to shoot yourself in the foot, right? Um, so it's prescriptive, yet it's flexible enough to be able to support all these other things. And machine learning models are something that we support. So all the provenance information and all the licensing and pedigree, if you have like foundational models and base models and all these other things, they can be described in CycloneDX today, right? We've kind of standardized on the concept of model cards. And CycloneDX has a machine-readable version of essentially a model card. It is just another type of component within the CycloneDX document, and you can specify everything from the approach to the type of task it's going to do, to what are the I/O formats, what are the data sets, what are maybe some of the use cases and technical limitations, what are some of the environmental concerns. This is actually one of the new things in CycloneDX 1.6. Turns out the AI Act from the EU actually has a requirement that for high risk models that we actually track the environmental concerns of a given model through the life cycle of that model. So all the energy and carbon emissions that went into training all the way through inference can be tracked in CycloneDX today. So lots and lots of capabilities here. So this obviously meets the AI Act. This meets some of the EEO stuff in the United States. In addition to obviously 14028, there's executive order. I think it was 141.1 or something like that, or there was another executive order for AI that CycloneDX does exceed. One of the um, other, I guess, big talking things is really around cryptography. Lots of organizations are starting to prepare for a post-quantum reality. So we've partnered with IBM, who a couple of years ago, they forked the CycloneDX specification and assessed what specifications were out there. They decided on CycloneDX, and they created a fork of CycloneDX a couple of years ago. We have since taken that fork and have upstreamed all the changes, and then of course made some more changes to make it more awesome than what it already was. And now cryptography is just another feature of the CycloneDX specification. Everything eventually goes back to inventory, though, right? You can't assess risk if you don't know what you have. And so we start off with cryptography asset management. And then there's a bunch of other use cases in here that CycloneDX provides as well, and we'll go through them just in a little bit here. As I mentioned, asset management is essentially the first step, just knowing what you have, whether it's software, hardware, an AI model, cryptography algorithm, right? Just knowing what you have is kind of the starting point to be able to assess any kind of risk. This is actually a requirement of OMB M23-2, though. So all federal agencies actually need to do this, and CycloneDX actually gives them the ability to do so. One of the, I think, obvious things that you can do once you have this information is discovering weak algorithms, right? Am I using MD5? Am I using SHA-1? Am I using triple DES? Well, that's really important information because while none of those algorithms are vulnerable, they are all certainly weak. So being able to inventory what you have so that you can identify these weak algorithms is can help you prioritize remediation efforts. This is really the driving use case of this, though. PQC readiness or post-quantum cryptography readiness. This really gives you a structured approach to inventorying cryptographic assets and ensuring their resilience against quantum threats. Now, there is a draft of NIST 1838B, which defines CBOM as a PQC requirement, and it uses multiple examples from CycloneDX in the NIST documentation. They do have a mapping to SSDF as well. So if you are required to attest to the U.S. government, then CBOM capabilities in CycloneDX would help you with that attestation requirement. You can, another use case of CBOM is to assess cryptographic policies. CNSA 2.0, for example, actually has some guidelines for federal agencies, US federal agencies, in terms of what dates, what types of algorithms, what the deprecation schedule is, and what the end of life schedule will be, right? So with CycloneDX, right, you can help to you facilitate the compliance to some of these policies and advisories. Another interesting use case is identifying expiring and long-term crypto material, right? If something expires tomorrow versus 20 years from now, well, those things are two very different risks, right? I might want to take a look at that thing that expires in 20 years and reevaluate my expiration policy. Likewise, if something expires tomorrow, well, that's also interesting because if that thing expires tomorrow and it's a production system, well, that could potentially lead to a denial of service condition, right? So that affects availability. So CycloneDX can kind of help you identify these things. One of the interesting things, and you can do this with AI, you can do this with a bunch of different things, but one of the things that you can do with CycloneDX is to help ensure different types of certifications, including cryptographic certifications. Now, out of the box, CycloneDX supports all the FIPS and common criteria certs. Also with CycloneDX, you can represent standards. Any standard could be represented along with the requirements of that standard, as well as the attestations for the requirements of that. So if you wanted to attest to SSDF, or if you wanted to attest to BSIM or some PCI Security Standards Council standard, or some internal organization standard or policy, you can actually represent that standard or policy in CycloneDX, and you can attest to the individual requirements along with supplying the evidence, the counter evidence, the confidence, the conformance, even the signatories can be represented in there along with both analog and digital signatures, because analog signatures are still a thing. So we support that use case. But you can use attestations to attest to any certification, including the FIPS, including the AI Act, including SSDF. With CycloneDX, you also have formulation. And formulation is really this idea of how something came to be. You know, how software was created, how it was tested, how it was deployed, maybe how an AI model was trained, evaluated, or maybe I spent 15 minutes in the kitchen trying to make some chocolate chip cookies for my daughter. Well, I can describe that in CycloneDX as well, right? It's not specific to software. But theoretically, you could describe the precise steps that you took to gain cryptographic certification and do that in a completely independent manner. So that provides organizations next level capabilities. This goes far beyond simple software bills of materials. The types of things that can be represented in a CBOM, kind of like what we talked about with AI previously. We can describe like the algorithms. You can describe the certificate properties, information about the protocols, and then there's this big hump of things that we just kind of call related crypto materials. Turns out that a lot of different cryptographic assets have very similar properties, and a lot of those similarities can be described in this one bucket. So everything from public keys to nuances to seeds and tags and everything else can be represented in CycloneDX. CycloneDX does support life cycles, right? So we support key management states as defined by NIST. And this allows us to essentially manage keys from the inception, right? So if we're tracking the life cycle of things, we can kind of, track it from all the way from when they're activated to the fact that maybe they're compromised or ultimately, destroyed. But CycloneDX also supports like traditional life cycles as well. So if I go to this next slide, it can be combined with other life cycles. So, for example, if my build system, if I'm building software, and I realize that maybe I'm using a compromised key, well, that's interesting. Or maybe maybe I have an operational bill of material, and I've got a bill of material for something that's in operations today, and maybe it was deactivated. Well, that's also interesting, right? Because that affects availability. So, but both of these things can be described in CycloneDX today. So that gives organizations some really interesting use cases to use with their key management. So CBOMs do address the executive order. They are part of software. So in addition to your software bill of materials, right, you can actually describe the cryptographic algorithms as part of your inventory. You can also describe them separately, right, as a separate document, and the documents can actually refer to one another. So both of those use cases are absolutely supported. But as the US government kind of expands their definition of what is software over time, CycloneDX already supports the things that the government will probably start including in some of their attestations later on. For example, with SSDF, right? If you want to purchase, or if you want to sell to the US government, there is an attestation form from CISA. And it requires the majority of SSDF, which is NIST 800-218. Well, 218A is currently in development. 218A is essentially SSDF for generative AI and dual use models, right? So it's going to be it'll ultimately be a requirement for anyone selling to the government that have AI in their software to also have that AI be conformant to SSDF. And as CISA starts revising their forms and starts including these other things, including AI, including cryptography, CycloneDX has all these capabilities already. So if the organization starts standardizing on CycloneDX, it's going to give you a really easy path to be able to hit these compliance requirements from the US and other governments. By the way, CISA, although in the United States, Executive Order 14028, which ultimately led to SSDF and the SBOM and a bunch of other things, CISA has been shopping SSDF around to other world governments as well, trying to get alignment from other world governments. In fact, the Quad, which is the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, are all kind of aligning on SSDF today. So if you look at those governments' websites, they're all aligning on SSDF, and I'm sure that CISA is probably working with other world governments as well. We have a lot of stuff in the kitchen, and I'm really, really excited about some of the work that is ongoing and that's going to be going for 1.7. One of the things about a bill of material is that yes, it's very, very useful, um, for wide range of use cases. However, for procurement use cases, which I'm really especially interested in, because I think there's just a lack of transparency in most procurement use cases. For procurement use cases, it really doesn't help defenders in any meaningful way. And we're introducing a lot of new capabilities in the next version of CycloneDX that will, in fact, help defenders in organizations defend their applications that they procure from other vendors from attack. So this is some really interesting stuff that I'm happy to share with the community. So back to our little thing. And we've got 3 question marks at the bottom. What are those things? Well, we're introducing the concept of blueprints, threat models, and OSS sustainability. So blueprints. Blueprints are essentially a combination of 2 things. They are a combination of architectural bill of materials, or ABOM, and what we refer to as BOB, or bill of behaviors. So let me rewind a little bit. Architectural bill of materials, being able to describe the high level abstract architecture of how something was assembled, right? Not the actual formulation, but the high level abstract of, what is it that I actually just acquired? You can also, with 1.7, you'll be able to describe what is the expected behavior from that particular thing, whether it's a certain component, maybe the expected behavior of an AI model, maybe the expected behavior of some given service to provide stock quotes, right? What is the behavior of that thing? Well, also with CycloneDX 1.7, you can describe the observed behavior, right? The expected behavior and the observed behavior could in fact be different. Could be different for different reasons, right? Maybe there's a quality issue, maybe there's a defect somewhere. Maybe it's under attack, right? Lots of reasons why the expected and observed behavior could be different, but those anomalies can actually be represented in CycloneDX 1.7, and those anomalies would then feed to the various blue teams and that sort of thing inside organizations. So blueprints, really excited about. Threat modeling. So right now we have a lot of different threat modeling tools. We have commercial tools. There's open source tools. There are now there's some requirements, in fact, for secure design, secure by default. These initiatives are mostly coming from various world governments, right? The EU, the United States, etc. And threat modeling being a practice that you would typically do in a secure software development lifecycle. Well, the entire threat modeling industry is actually backing CycloneDX today. In fact, we had the kickoff call of the work group earlier today, where these individuals actually write the books on threat modeling, both security, safety, and privacy threat modeling, as well as the commercial and open source tool creators of threat modeling things, right? All came together today. And we kicked off the working group to align the entire threat modeling industry on a interoperable standard that will be methodology agnostic and support essentially any threat modeling use case that we throw at it. So this is going to be a lot of fun. If anyone in the audience is interested in any of this work, all of this is open, right? These work groups are open to anybody. and we invite participation from all corners of the globe. Um, Originally, there was an OTM or open threat modeling format. This was an attempt by a commercial vendor to provide that thing. However, that's kind of a short-term solution. The long-term solution by the entire threat modeling industry is, in fact, to standardize on CycloneDX, and that work is just getting started. The third and final thing that we're introducing in Cyclone 1.7 is support for OSS sustainability. I personally think this is really important, especially for procurement cases or even your first party developed, cases. Um, right now, the majority of SBOMs that I see are actually created by development teams in their own organization. And without any intention to actually be shared, right? Maybe it's internal application, and they're using SBOM as kind of a best practice. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Um, However, with an SBOM, we believe that if organizations are in fact using, maybe you're using a particular framework or library all over the place. Well, that kind of visibility is really interesting. And how, surfacing how as an organization you might want to give back to those authors or to that foundation, because it does provide a lot of business value to use that component. Well, we think that's important. So being able to highlight the sustainability of open source is something that we're going to be working on for 1.7 as well. So all three of these initiatives, the middle one, the threat modeling, has already kicked off. The other two will be started here in the next couple of weeks. But all three of these are open to the entire community for participation. If you're interested in these, I highly encourage you to get involved. So now what? I mean, you have an SBOM. Uh, what do you do with it?
Yeah, Steve, I think first I just want to say thank you for what you're doing at OWASP with CycloneDX. Thank you for the knowledge you've shared here today and a glimpse into the future. 1.7 looks really, really awesome. I'm personally excited about that. And if it's any evidence of how much we appreciate what you're doing, ReversingLabs will generate CycloneDX XBOMs, or sorry, SBOMs rather, through our product, exportable in JSON format, and our R&D team is dedicated to keeping up with you as you iterate. So currently we generate 1.4, but very soon we'll be right there with you at 1.6, and I have no doubts that we'll be right on your heels with 1.7. And here at ReversingLabs, we think that these SBOMs and the standardizing that you've done here is really the foundation that the world needs to deal with software supply chain attacks. I'm personally really concerned with this type of attack. I think it is designed specifically to bypass modern security controls and architectures, things like zero trust, really strong. But if you're downloading a trusted software from a trusted source and it's detonated by a trusted user and it's got malware embedded in it, it's going to bypass those controls. So I want to take a minute now that we have this insight from Steve to talk about on the next slide what ReversingLabs is doing that's building on top of CycloneDX and really leveraging it. We at ReversingLabs have a platform, a unified portfolio of products, but there's one in particular that I want to talk about today called SpectraAssure. That's our software supply chain security tool. It's built on top of Spectra Core, which is inclusive of that threat repository I mentioned at the beginning, AI-driven complex binary analysis, and some world-class threat research. But paramount to this is that one in the middle, that AI-driven complex binary analysis. On the next slide, I'll kind of walk you through a little bit of what it's doing, but it has several key outputs. We're going to tell you if any binary that you have has malware, evidence of tampering, vulnerabilities, if there are opportunities for hardening, if there's secrets, licenses, and last but certainly not least, we're giving you the ability to generate an SBOM. And you can do this on demand anytime. You will no longer be relying on your vendor to supply these. You will no longer have to ask every time there's an update. You will no longer have to hope that this vendor is supporting CycloneDX SBOMs. You'll be able to generate those on your own. On the next slide, I'll walk you through a little bit the process of what complex binary analysis is doing. Every time you have a new piece of software or an update or a patch, you'll run it through this engine where first it will identify the format from over 4,800 different types or using AI ML if the no signature is detected there. We'll then process that format. We'll unpack, deobfuscate, identify behaviors. We'll do some extraction and analysis, processing that metadata, and then we'll begin to classify and assess these files. From this, if there's another component inside that needs to be extracted, we'll recursively repeat that process down to its smallest parts, and the output will be a final report and an SBOM. Next slide, please. Another really important thing about what ReversingLabs is doing is we're giving you the opportunity to do this if you're a developer or if you're bringing software into your environment after the final build. And that's really crucial because some other tools that may offer SBOMs are doing that before things like artifacts are brought in, and they're not actually including the real complete bill of materials that's actually alive and running in your environment. Next slide, please. So what does this report look like? Like I said before, you will be able to export a CycloneDX SBOM in JSON to use as you see fit in any way that you might need. Again, with these being machine learnable, there's a lot of things that are readable. There's a lot of things that you can do with that. But we've also created a report that can act as a sort of Rosetta Stone, creating a common language between developers, cybersecurity professionals, and risk professionals that takes into consideration all of these nuanced security elements and up levels them and puts them in very simple terms. We have what we call ReversingLabs levels, levels 1 through 5. L5 is incredibly secure code that you can really trust to be free of malware, vulnerabilities, any of the things that we might detect. And L1 less so, and everything in between. You can even customize these levels depending on what your company's risk appetite is. Next slide, please. So whether you're a software producer and you're trying to identify software supply chain issues before you release, or you're an enterprise buyer trying to find hidden threats before you deploy or update, ReversingLabs wants to be your check before you ship, before you deploy, to give you comfort in the software that you're using to be sure that it's not going to lead to a devastating supply chain attack. With that, I think that is my last slide. I'd like to open it up to any questions that have come in from the audience. And I will bring up my Q&A panel. All right, Steve, one for you is how can we increase the adoption of CycloneDX from vendors of software to be sure that whatever software I'm buying can come alongside, can have a CycloneDX Bill of Materials alongside it?
Yeah. I think organizations have, for the most part, been fairly slow to add SBOM requirements in their procurement process. I think the first step is to, for security and legal teams to partner with their procurement organizations to actually start getting SBOMs for the software that they purchase. Now, whether you get all SBOMs for all software, I don't know. Maybe you start off with a subset. Maybe you start off with SBOMs, making that a hard requirement for any critical system that you might have in your environment. Or maybe you're a product company and maybe you require SBOMs for any commercial library software that ultimately ends up in the product that you resell, right? So maybe start somewhere though, and eventually expand that over time so that you're getting SBOMs from all of your suppliers.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think, the more we see adoption, the more it gains critical mass, the more it'll become ubiquitous across vendors. And I know here at RL we would support that in any way we can. Part of why we're glad to have you here to be able to speak to it, Steve. This next one looks like one for me. Are you saying this can be done of software you are purchasing, such as commercial off-the-shelf products, provide .exe and get an SBOM? Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. Any binary that you are purchasing before you buy or before you deploy, you will run it through our product. It's very fast, very easy to do. In fact, you don't even need to be a security professional to run it, to be able to leverage this product or understand the output. And you will get a CycloneDX SBOM in JSON, as well as that report that I told you that kind of gives you actions you can take. And we're doing things like mapping our findings to MITRE, where then you can take one step further and look at the technique and find the mitigations and plan accordingly if you do have to bring something in that might be inclusive of a potential threat vector. Great question, and thank you for asking. The next one is this one looks like for you, Steve, perhaps. Have OBOMs been replaced with architecture bombs?
Right. So for those that may not know, OBOM or operational bill of material kind of represents the operational state of something. Typically, when you acquire software or develop software, it's usually deployed somewhere, whether it's a physical server in a cloud environment, whatever. The operational bill of material encompasses all of that environmental as well as all the configuration about that running thing. um, that is that's really the end joint end place that a lot of organizations, I believe, really need to get to. So though that is certainly not being replaced. ABOM, or architectural bill of material, is really more of an abstract concept. It's think of UML but a few levels higher. For example, and I don't know if this is going to work in once the spec is out, but this is kind of what the group is considering today. For example, I might actually have a microservice, and that microservice accepts input from a REST API. It processes the data, and then it persists that data. Maybe that's what it does. So from an architecture perspective, we can describe that in CycloneDX. Well, maybe that microservice has a vulnerable version of Log4j. And upon inspecting the ABOM, I realized that in that flow of input from the REST API to the processing of data to the persisting of that data, I realized that input validation is missing. So as a mitigating control, I might deploy a WAF in front of that microservice as a temporary measure while my development team is actually fixing Log4j. And theoretically, that can be done automatically. That's the kind of information that really helps defense teams actually defend applications in their environment.
Very cool. Thank you for that. The next one, some complex applications have million-line SBOMs. How would you recommend processing and analyzing so much information? I will start with my biased answer. I would recommend leveraging our product at ReversingLabs, which will literally process and analyze it for you and give you a risk score on a level 1 to 5. It will tell you what CVEs are present. It will tell you malware, tampering opportunities for hardening, licensing secrets, and it will tell you steps you can take to deal with those. But I also would like to hear from Steve a potentially less biased answer on how you can that you recommend processing and analyzing especially large SBOMs. And do feel free to to be unbiased in your answer there.
Yeah, no worries. I think performance considerations are real, and when you have such a large SBOM, it can be problematic. The largest one that I've personally seen is around 50 megabytes in size. It had around 30,000 components in it. And I don't know how many lines of code that was, but it was a lot. I don't know if it was in the millions or not, but it was a lot of components, like 30,000 or so. Obviously, one architectural pattern, regardless of whether it's an SBOM or something else, is to kind of break that apart into smaller pieces. And CycloneDX actually does have that capability. So maybe though that million line SBOM, well, maybe you've got a component that has, well, maybe that one component has 30,000 other components inside. So maybe you might want to decouple that from the other SBOM. And suddenly you might end up with 10 different SBOMs. But with CycloneDX, we actually have this linking mechanism called BOM link. It's a registered URN, registered with IANA, that allows you to deep link from one BOM to another. So you don't necessarily have to have that million line SBOM if you don't want to. Maybe you're using an application that falls over for whatever performance reasons, right? Not every application is going to be tested for that large of an SBOM. So maybe you might want to break it apart, and CycloneDX actually allows you to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. So the questions have stopped. Everyone bring out your phones if you want to scan the QR code on the next slide that has a few assets from OWASP for you. I encourage you to check out some authoritative guides. They have the guide to SBOM, the guide to SaaSBOM, the guide to ML-BOM, the guide to attestations, and the guide to CBOM. You could also just go to that URL. It's pretty short URL if you just want to go there as well, cyclonedx.org/guides. And then to close things out here at RL, we have, oh no, I apologize, more. Some community participation links for you. We have websites that we encourage you to check out, CycloneDX GitHub, Slack channels where a lot of folks are really active, as well as a mailing list to get up-to-date information. And then the next slide, I do believe, is the one that I thought was coming. I apologize for that. At RL, we have a continuing cadence of really fun and exciting webinars. The upcoming are the insights from the latest Gartner report. You can actually go ahead and check that report out now. We've licensed it for you, so you don't need a Gartner license to read the Leader's Guide to Software Supply Chain Security. That'll be myself alongside Sasha, our Chief Trust Officer. And then if you happen to be at Black Hat, come by and check us out. We also have episode 3 of the Spectra Assure product spotlight on July 25th, where you'll see our own Joe Coletta talking about how you can find safest dependencies for your app with Spectra Assure community. Next slide, please. And with that, I just want to thank you, Steve, for your time today and frankly, the work you do with OWASP, a really awesome nonprofit organization that I do believe is making strides at making the world a safer space from supply chain attacks. And I want to thank our audience for attending, for the questions, for the engagement. I hope you learned something today, and everyone have a great afternoon.